Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I grew up in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, and I moved out of that community when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for almost 8 years now and have 2 beautiful babies.
Yes, and we are back reacting to part 2 of the documentary, Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey, that's on Netflix.
Yes, and quickly, I need to give a couple updates before we get into this. One, welcome all of our new subscribers. Thank you all so much. I cannot believe how much growth we've had in the last couple weeks. So all of you that are here from the Netflix series and wanting to know more about polygamy, thank you for being here. If you want to know more about what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy, please like and subscribe. We release a video every Friday morning Pacific time and kind of give a little bit more insight and try to interview other people to empower them to tell their stories of growing up in polygamy as well.
Thank you all so much for your support and for being here. We just love having you, and thank you for all of your great questions and comments as well.
Absolutely. Also, if you want to follow us on Instagram at Growing Up in Polygamy, we are going to be starting to take a lot more polls because we're starting to do more interviews. We're going to have a women's panel here coming up in a few weeks with myself, being raised LDS, Joanna, who we've had on the YouTube before that grew up FLDS, and then Amanda Ray from the Kingston clan as well. So we're going to be asking on our Instagram questions for that panel. So make sure to hop over to our Instagram and be able to participate in those next week. We're also in the process of building our website right now.
Finally.
So that you can have know more of what's going on, what we have planned for the future, and have easy access to our videos there. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Again, you can follow us on Instagram to kind of stay more in tune with what's going on.
We'll try to keep that rolling and updated a little bit more often, just so you can all see what's going on, what's coming up, and all of that. So
absolutely. Also, we are getting a lot of requests for reaction videos, which we love. So please keep those coming in the comments and let us know. Also, we're not sure. We don't want everyone to get sick of us. So we've kind of been throwing around whether or not we want to do a reaction video and an answer to a question video every week and do 2 videos a week, or if it's best that we stay at 1 video a week and don't make you all tired and sick of us. So let us know in the comments.
You're going to give them the option of 2 a week? Oh boy.
Well, yeah, I want to know, because
you better be prepared for this.
I don't know, people I watch on YouTube, sometimes I'm like, once a week is good. True. We will not be offended if you're like, once a week is not perfect with my timing. No. So let us know in the comments.
Yes, thank you all.
And we will get going.
Back to this, though. I wish that we could have part of the screen playing the video. In a perfect world, we would be doing that, but with the copyright issues and all of that, we just don't want to cause any problems. We've tried this before, and because this isn't a YouTube video, there's just no way that we know of anyway of getting around the copyright on it.
Yeah, YouTube, sometimes you can do fair use and try to challenge it, but since it is a Netflix series, we can't put it on there for you to watch. However, we are going to try it a little bit differently today.
Yes.
And we are going to watch it live so that you can see our reactions. And we'll just keep it rolling and react to it as it goes along, is the plan. And then see if maybe that works out a little bit better and you can kind of keep the timeline rather than us just commentating afterwards on the general gist of it. So hopefully this will be a little bit more specific to the timeline of the show. Yes. And you could maybe either watch along
watch along with us. Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to try it this way, just as another way to try to get around the best way to react without dealing with copyright issues.
Forgive any long pauses. Let's get into it.
Okay, and here we go. We're going to get started. Again, this is part 2 of Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey on Netflix. So this is September of 2002, right after Rulon had died, which was the last part of the first episode.
So interesting, because so many people during that time didn't expect him to ever die. I guess they were told that he was going to be the last prophet.
Did anybody know what was going to happen to all the wives?
Nothing was really talked about around the community. Obviously, it seems like Warren had a plan.
Yeah.
He married so many of Rulon's wives pretty quickly after he died. So unfortunately, it seems like Warren sort of had this planned out all along, or at least for a while.
Gotcha. And we've had a lot of people ask right now as they're showing that like Warren had a plan for all of these women to eventually marry him, about Sam's sister and whether or not, since she had been married to Rulon, did she end up marrying Warren Jeffs?
She did not end up marrying Warren Jeffs. She was actually married to Warren's oldest brother for a time. When Warren's oldest brother was forced out of the community, she was then married to another one of Warren's younger brothers. And I don't know for sure where that stands now, but I believe that she is separated from him at this point as well, as what I've heard. So I feel it's just makes me a little angry. So everything that's going on, especially when it's involving my sister directly.
Yeah.
Sent a chill down my spine. And I went to my husband about it. He said, something's wrong. And he says, nothing our prophet does is wrong.
She just said nothing our prophet does is wrong was the reaction that her husband gave as it's going into the intro. And I feel like that is very common, just not just in the FLDS, in the LDS as well. I feel like it's kind of like the LDS is kind of shying away from that concept that like the prophet can't be wrong, which is good. But I think that's definitely something that I grew up thinking that like, you know, follow the prophet. He knows the way.
Yeah.
That he won't lead you astray, basically ever, right?
In the FLDS, Warren and Rulon and all of them, they were not considered just another man. They were considered very, very protected and guided word for word from God. And we never would have guessed that they would do anything wrong or anything that God wouldn't want them to do.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this down just a little bit.
It's playing the song that they tweaked a little bit, calling themselves Uncle Warren's Soldiers.
Instead of Onward Christian Soldiers, saying Uncle Warren Soldiers.
And that type of thing was very common. Little tweaks to the words and that to some songs. Even my father we would read some or sing the hymns, and we would use the hymn book, but he would sometimes change the words just a little bit because he thought that it made more sense or sounded better.
Would they just change it every time there was like a different prophet? They would have to change the words again?
I don't know. I think it was a family to family thing. I don't remember them ever actually changing the book.
Gotcha.
You know, actually tearing anything out and redoing it that I remember.
Yeah. It seems like fear, as they're talking about, like fear was the driving force of Warren Jeffs. And I know you've mentioned before that it seemed like Warren really started making everybody scared of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't live my adult life there, or much of it anyway, but growing up, I was terrified. So much of the time I was terrified of what was to come next, and what he may stand up at the pulpit and say, or that we would be destroyed because of the prophecies he was giving and things like that. So definitely a lot of fear, which would force us, and almost I guess you could say force, to follow in line and to do what we were told to do because we were afraid of doing anything other than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now they're mentioning, which Sam's mentioned in some other videos, that now like there were so many rules that now they couldn't use the word fun, couldn't use the word quit, making everything more strict. Mm-hmm. Do you remember them taking away everyone's guns? That's something that they talk about in here.
I don't remember the gun thing. I do remember them forcing everyone to get rid of their dogs, though. I remember the dogs weren't allowed. I don't remember all the details. They almost made it seem like dogs were an evil animal or something like that, and so they forced us all to get rid of any dogs that we had. But the gun thing, I don't remember.
And then they just mentioned the color red, not being allowed to wear color red. Yes. Was that a thing?
They would tell us, yes, it was a thing. They would tell us that we weren't allowed to wear red because it was a sacred color, that was reserved for the returning of Jesus Christ.
Oh, okay.
That's what we were told, but because it was talked down on so much, it seemed more like an evil color than a good color, just the way that it was talked about throughout the community. So I'm not sure exactly what that,
Like where that came from,
I don't know what
or like the difference between whether or not it was sacred or bad.
Exactly.
Did you ever have to watch, and there's now starting to show like how women's hair had to be done very specifically, and they had like instructional videos. Obviously they're doing these for the women, but like did the boys ever have instructional videos on how to get dressed or how to be groomed?
They just showed a lady on this that actually just recently reached out to me saying that she had all of her children taken away from her, and she wants to meet up and talk. And I was just shocked to see her show up there as one of the women in the church. Maybe she was married to, I didn't say who she was married to, but
That's crazy.
interesting that they showed her right there all of a sudden. But the question, I didn't watch any videos. Nothing like that was given to me. I know that a lot of people started watching more of these instructional videos and that when they moved to the ranch or when they were more involved in the so-called building up of Zion.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
They're kind of talking about like that it would be better to die than to disobey. Is that something like in your home? Like, did you guys think that way? That like it was better?
Oh,
yeah, that
yes.
disobedience was like worse than death?
I'm going to keep names out of it for this little tidbit, but just to kind of illustrate a point. There was a time where, and I was there, so I've actually heard these words with my own ears, that some people were in a very bad accident and they were some of them almost died. They were in this accident. And after the people that were involved in the accident recovered and they were actually doing a lot better, they were all told by their father that he would have been much happier had they died in that moment than to ever come back and then leave the church. So definitely it was talked about, and it was a very strong feeling that disobeying or leaving the church was much worse than death.
That's crazy.
So puts it into perspective.
Yeah. It's kind of going into the Lost Boys now. And Dan Fisher, who they're showing, he's actually Sam's uncle. And for those of you who haven't seen the interview that we've done with Shem Fisher, Shem is Dan Fisher's brother. And I'll link his interview up above for you to go check that out because it's very, very interesting. And this private investigator who's like looking into everything out there right now. Shem and Dan did a lot of good work on giving the right paperwork to the FBI and helping take down Warren. So Shem's interview is very, very interesting if you want to know more about that and about the Lost Boys. And then their charity is Smiles for Adversity. It was originally formed to help the Lost Boys. So I'll put a link to that as well, for Smiles for Adversity as far as helping them. And I definitely saw like the Lost Boys because I lived in St. George, like 45 minutes outside of the creek, or Short Creek. They say it all sorts of different ways. But like we saw Lost Boys being taken in by families in St. George, and then they would go to high school and stuff. So I knew kids growing up that were Lost Boys that had gotten kicked out.
Little did you know the backstory of what was going on.
Yeah, I definitely did not know the full extent. I just knew that they had been kicked out for one reason or another from the community. But yeah, that was the extent of what I knew.
They're briefly talking about how Warren would handpick the law enforcement out there as well. So everything within the Short Creek area was run by him. The law enforcement, the mayor, you name it. Everyone that was kind of in charge of the law was also handpicked by Warren Jeffs and kind of told how to run things. So he had control of everything.
Yeah. Even though it may have seemed like they were still just a regular town, it was all religious. There was no like separation at all.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see. So the Wall family, they're showing like Lloyd Wall is talking about the different inventions and things that he had. And it's interesting to see the way that like they really like abuse the smart men in the community and like kind of suck everything out from them, like their ideas, their money, their companies. It's just really interesting.
It does seem like some of the most successful men were given like high callings, and they were kind of kept close to the leadership of the church.
Yeah.
So that, well, I don't know if it was the intent all along. I don't know how good of a mastermind Warren is or not, but it seemed like it was for the purpose of eventually then Warren being able to just say, okay, now all that you have is mine, and all the successful companies were turned into him, turned into the church, and he just took over everything.
We just had a family member we were talking to about Dan Fisher as well, and they were saying that the reason that he got kicked out was because, you know, he is like one of the most successful dentists in the world. Literally, you can look him up. And he's had a lot of inventions to like help dentistry and orthodontics and stuff. And basically, wasn't it Warren that was asking for like the company and being like, you need to give this up, you need to give this to the church? And he was like, no way. And then he left.
Not only just turning the company over to the church, but he was one of the people that lived in Salt Lake City, and during the Olympics time in 2002, he was being told to move down to Short Creek as well, along with everyone else, and give up everything he had. And so, yes, I believe that from what I've told, that's when he said, "No, I'm not giving this up. I'm not moving down."
Yeah, so kind of crazy, but if they tried to not give everything to the church, then they got kicked out.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I know a lot of people will see and be like, how can a man be taken? We're watching like Lloyd Wall's story, and like so many people think, how can a man like actually be taken away from his family? And watching his story, I feel like, you know, when the daughters are saying there was nothing he could do, and all he can do is go and try to be back into the good graces of the church. Just like everything that they've worked for, just being torn apart from him just to prove that Warren could. Just super, super sad.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of the ripping apart of the families was a power move, or to prove a point that if you don't listen to me, then this is what will happen to you. And oh man, I feel so bad for so many of these men.
Now they're just saying that he did end up handing over his company, his very successful company, to the church as a way of trying to earn his way back, right? Like, it's no matter what they did, it was never going to be enough.
For so many of these families, their faith was the most important thing to them.
Yeah.
I mean, as it is for a lot of people, not just the FLDS, but their faith was number one in their connection to God. And so to have that put into question, you know, they were willing to give up anything else because that was their number one.
Yeah. Yeah, all these construction companies that the FLDS ended up having control over through all the boys and all the free labor. I like that they mentioned that because obviously the things that happened to the women are horrible. Just all of it. But it's easy to see the way that the women were trafficked and given and passed around and all of that. But the men were definitely trafficked as well. It's still human trafficking to have that much labor for free and to have that much control over people having to work for you. Oh, he just said that. And domestic traffickers. Yeah, exactly. These men were also trafficked just for their work and for their money.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I look back now and I agree. I agree with that. But growing up in that circumstance, that's all I knew. That's all I had. And I was happy to do it. I didn't feel like I was being forced. You know, yeah. I mean, if you don't know any other way, if this is all you know, suddenly you're not being forced to do it because that's all there is, right? It's not like you have a choice. It's not like you can either do this or that. You know, it's this is your option, and you learn to be happy with it.
Well, and I know you've mentioned before, it was kind of like a whole culture of wanting to work like your brothers and be like grown up and getting out there on the job site. And
As a community, if everyone else is doing it, right, you just feel like that's the best thing to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
They make you live in fear all the time.
More talk about fear, living in fear all the time. And, I think they're right. Even today, with those that are still following Warren Jeffs, they're afraid that if they make a mistake, something bad could happen in this life. But even more importantly, they're afraid that if they make a mistake and go against Warren's teachings, that in the next life, that they will not be together with their families. Everything will be ripped apart from them. They will live in hell and damnation. And so it's just very terrifying, honestly, to even consider standing up against what you were taught your whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of going into, I missed her name, so I apologize. I will say it again, but she was talking about making like googly eyes in church to a boy. Did you ever make googly eyes at a girl? Because obviously that's a huge no-no, to be flirting at all or to be liking anyone of the opposite sex or really noticing them is definitely bad. But
Yes. So by the time I got into my young teenage years and actually started having the feelings of wanting to spend more time with the girls out there and that kind of thing, or even having those thoughts, the church meetings were already kind of coming to an end at that point. I mean, we did have some, but I don't remember a whole lot of. I do definitely remember scanning the crowd and wondering, I wonder who I will marry someday.
who has the biggest poof?
And who? No, I wasn't looking for the most righteous, but I would scan the crowd and definitely try to pick out the cute girls and kind of wonder and think about who I might end up with one day. Since I had no choice in the matter, it was a fun game, I guess.
Yeah. That's so sweet that he wrote a note to her and dropped it off. Oh, it makes me so sad for them because this is such like typical.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like every young teenager experiences this where you want to talk on the phone until it's too late and you're trying to be quiet so your parents don't hear you and all those type of things. And so to see this, knowing that like they're not allowed to and it had to be in such secrecy, it's just to really. Did you ever use a landline to talk to other people?
No, I didn't start.
You couldn't have pulled that off, could you have?
It would have been difficult.
Okay.
I didn't start talking to girls outside of my family until I had a cell phone.
Gotcha.
And it was one of those fancy flip phones that were the cool thing to have back in the day. And I got to the point where I could have my phone in my pocket and I could be texting during like a family meeting or something, and I just kind of got good at doing it in secret.
That reminds me of high school, like when we used to text in our hoodies. Like you wear a hoodie and then you could just like read the message real quick. And that was back in the day when teachers would actually take your phones. Like nowadays, like kids can just use their phones in class and it's whatever because they use it for all sorts of things. But when I was in high school, that was a no-no. So you had to be able to text in your hoodie.
Everything was hidden out there. We weren't allowed to. I mean, they just showed was it a Walkman? Is that what they were called?
Yeah.
With the CD
Yeah,
player.
yeah.
Okay. So a Walkman, I had one of those, and I had to hide that. I had a little portable DVD player. I had to hide that. So I definitely was bending and breaking some rules as a young teenage boy. But man, there was always some type of adrenaline because you were, seconds from being caught sometimes. And I did get caught sometimes, and they would, of course, take everything away and try to take your cell phone away or make it so that you can't go to work for a while, that type of thing, which not going to work was a punishment, believe it or not.
Now they're talking about like hoping that Warren was going to let them be together. Were there instances where you had seen that where people were able to ask if they could get married and that they actually were able to?
Not in Warren's time of being prophet.
But had that happened before?
Before Warren, I had heard of, and I wasn't there in person, but I heard actually one of my older brothers went and spoke with Rulon Jeffs and actually got permission to marry the girl he wanted to. And I don't know all the details behind this story, but they didn't last in the church for more than maybe a year or so after they were married. So Maybe it was a, hey, I want to marry this girl. Either you let me marry her or I'm gonna leave. I don't know how all the details were on that, but they were allowed to get married within the church. So.
Oh, this breaks my heart. This is her taking a break because she's talking about the fact that she's oh, so sad. It breaks my heart. But that she just got told that she was going to be married to someone, but not to Joe, not to the boy that she loved. And she was only 14. Did it seem like, now I don't know how many underage marriages you really saw, but like, did it seem like they picked the girls that were rebellious to marry young?
Not always. Sometimes the more rebellious ones actually would get married a little bit older, and so we would think, well, they're not getting married yet because they're not righteous enough. But I mean, it just depends. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. It just depended on the situation. But as time went on, and as Warren became fully in power and having all the power to do what he wanted, it seemed like a lot of the girls were getting married younger.
Gotcha.
So
definitely seemed to be.
wow, that is a high poof on that girl. Holy
I think that was of Elisa.
smokes. Wow, that's impressive, Elisa. That was like an 8-inch poof right there on top of your head.
Oh, now Elisa's talking about finding out it was her cousin. You gotta wonder, in a situation like that, you gotta wonder, like, what makes Warren, like, what could be going through his head to be like, you need to marry your cousin?
See, and who knows, but I do know there are other groups out there, religious groups, that marrying your cousin is actually fairly common. So thankfully, this didn't seem to happen very often in the FLDS, at least not that I know of. But man, to get married to someone that you know you're very closely related to, and just already knowing the difficulties that come along with that, where with having children and all those things, that, you know, who knows.
Well, and it's her cousin, and she didn't like him from the very beginning, too.
You're right. He was very mean to her growing up, and so she already didn't like him.
But you just got to wonder, like, what was going through. I mean, anytime you see, like, a young child bride being married to Warren, you know what's going through his head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what's happening. But to make a choice like that seems like the only thing in my mind that it could be is, like, a power move, because why else would you...
And it wasn't, hey, this is who you have been chosen to marry by God, and you know, this is the way it should be. How do you feel? No, it was, hey, you need to marry him. And when she went to Warren with her concerns and begging him not to make it happen, he basically forced him to do it.
Yeah.
And said, no, this is who you're supposed to marry, and this is the way it is. And I just can't even imagine. I feel so bad for her.
And then for her to marry her second cousin.
I actually know this Joe Roebuck.
Oh, really?
I mean, I saw him around the community a lot anyway.
Wow. To even say, like, at 14, to be willing to say, like, let's leave together and let's build a life together, that'd be pretty brave, especially as a woman, right? Like.
Oh, yes. I at one point had a girl text me and say, what if I told you that I wanted to leave the community?
Really?
And she was the one that actually brought it up, and being the perfect little boy that I was, I wasn't actually ever perfect, but I was still fully believing in the church and had no idea what the life outside of the church would mean. So I just kind of ignored it.
Really?
I don't even know if I responded, or if I did respond, I don't know what I said, because I wasn't ready for any of that type of commitment.
How old were you when she said that?
Oh boy. I would say probably 16.
Okay.
So a couple years before I was brave enough to make it happen.
Man. Now they're talking about Warren's devotionals.
Mm-hmm.
And was that something that, like, all the children, all the boys, who had to be in the devotionals?
So I'm sorry. I actually never went to the devotionals in person, but the devotionals were written down, and those were passed out throughout the community, and we were supposed to read them.
Oh, okay.
So basically, it was like a new scripture or something, I guess you could call it. And we were supposed to read through those devotionals. And they were called devotionals, but on paper.
Gotcha.
So boring. As a young boy, being forced to read those things, oh my gosh. Oh man, I did not enjoy that at all.
Now, Elisa was talking about something that Joanna recently mentioned to me about like that instead of just like going to hell, you would actually, your spirit would just like completely disappear into nothingness.
For the women, yes.
So that was just for the women.
So the women would disappear, and basically their spirit would be used to form another spirit or something. It was kind of confusing. I don't remember all the details.
I'll have to ask Joanna about that.
But the men, I believe, were just to be tortured for all eternities by Satan. That was kind of the idea of that. So I think being poofed into nothingness would be my choice if you had to choose between the two of those.
Both of them still, that's crazy at such a young age.
Yeah, to think about what that meant, yes.
Yeah.
And for someone that's, an atheist or something, it might be easy to say, well, being poofed into nothingness, well, no big deal, whatever. But being raised the way that we were out there, I mean, this was a very, very strict, high demand. We knew step by step exactly what was going to happen on the other side, or at least so we thought we did. We thought that once we passed on from this life, these were the steps. This is exactly what was going to happen. It was laid out before us. And so we were either very afraid or very excited because we were told that how beautiful and amazing it would be on the other side. So it was just one of those things that if you're so excited for what's to come and then being told, no, because you did this one wrong thing, you're going to be poofed into nothingness, that no longer sounds appealing. That is very sad and very traumatic.
It's crazy to me that like they took these two 14-year-old girls all the way to Caliente, all the way to be married to their cousin. Like sometimes I think of the fact that like Warren Jeffs is in charge of like 10,000 people, right? And I'm like, I don't even know how he could even keep them straight, right? And so it almost makes more sense that he's picking out ones like for himself, like pervertedly, right? But the idea that he's like making these matches, having them do it in secret, like going through this much fuss just to force underage girls to marry their cousins is like, I can't even, like, he has nothing better to do with 10,000 people. Like, it honestly blows my mind to see, and it's so, so heartbreaking.
Yeah. He had to keep the show going, I guess you could say, I mean, if during the times where it was okay that people were getting married, if people just all of a sudden stopped being married, they would be concerned that God wasn't talking to their prophet anymore and telling him who they were supposed to marry. And so I think that it was just a big show, and he was doing it because he felt that by doing these marriages, it would help the people be more obedient and continue to believe in him as a prophet.
Yeah.
Hearing his voice, though, oh my goodness. I mean, it's hard to explain his speaking voice and also his singing voice. I mean, it's just, not in a good way, but it just is like a flood of memories. Just hard to explain, but man, it is something else. Because we used to, his voice was associated with the most amazing, spiritual, godlike person ever. And as a young boy growing up, I always associated his voice with that image of a perfect person on earth. So now to hear his voice, it's just, oh my goodness, it just plays with your brain a little bit.
Now that like I'm a mother, the idea of having your child just sobbing in your arms, begging and begging and begging, pleading.
This was with Elisa, right?
Mm-hmm. And to have your child just sobbing to make it stop, like, I just can't, like, it's just so hard to imagine and to know that those mothers, like, the mental place that you have to be to like let that happen. I know a lot of people think, okay, well, there's no way I could let it happen. And I'm definitely one of those people too. Like there's no way I could have that happen to my daughter. But I think sometimes we look at that the wrong way. We think there's no way I could do that, instead of thinking for a second, like, what kind of mental space would a mother be in?
Have to be in.
And the way that they would have to be, like, have their mindset change themselves to be able to let that happen. And that shows you the sad circumstance and what victims they are as well. Because to be in a headspace to let that happen to your daughter, I think is just as sad. It's just awful all around.
No, it's if anyone ever tries to claim that the FLDS women didn't love their children enough to stand up for them or something along those lines, that's just not true. I saw and witnessed firsthand the love that these women had for their children, and they would do anything for them. But they thought that it wasn't some man forcing this to happen. They thought it was God. And they assumed that things as powerful as a woman turning into a pillar of salt, use an example from the Bible, could happen to them if they disobeyed. It wasn't just maybe I can run away with my daughter and nothing will happen. No, they assumed the worst, and they felt that they had to obey.
Do you remember seeing any of these reporters? Now it's kind of going into some reporters who just wouldn't let it go, what was going on. I mean, thank goodness in the end, right? But do you remember seeing any reporters and like more attention being brought to the community?
I did, and it was very frowned upon. We I don't know if hated them was the right word to use, but we did not like them around our community. We thought that they were just trying to destroy us and cause problems for the community. And anyway, we thought nothing good of them. But I do remember some reporters popping up here and there. Yeah. And I know that my father had to deal with a lot of reporters too, being the mayor of Hilldale. He, of course, had a lot of attention around him, and a lot of reporters tried to talk to him, and he would also discuss his, I guess, run-ins with them, and he always talked about it as a negative thing.
Yeah. Do you think your father knew the full extent of what was going on?
No way. No, you mean with Warren?
Yeah.
Not a chance. No way. Most of the men out there, even the ones with the highest callings, within the church or within law enforcement, whatever the case may be, they had no idea to what he was fully doing. No. I mean, they were aware of some of the underage marriages and things like that, still assuming that it was coming from God, not just his own wishes. But no, there's no way that they would have fully known what was going on.
I know they mentioned just barely again about needing 3 wives to get to heaven. And you'd mentioned before that's not something that you had personally heard, but we've heard it in quite a few of these documentaries that we've watched.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, so I guess it was a thing. I mean, I'll admit that maybe I was wrong in saying that it wasn't ever taught, but it's not anything that was told me specifically. I was never married. Maybe when you get married to your first wife, you're told, okay, now you need 2 more to be able to reach the highest degree of glory and all of that. But it wasn't anything that was ever told me.
It's interesting that like it seems like the boys weren't given as much instruction as far ahead of like, this is what you need to do and this is what, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like you got as much instruction as what the girls did. The girls were like, this is how you're a good daughter. This is how you are a good wife, from the time that they're really, really young. And the boys, like, yeah, you might not have known until later, and it would have been just fine. It would have been like, oh, okay, well, I'll worry about that later, and then I'll get my 3 wives. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's kind of, yeah.
I mean,
gives another insight, right?
Yeah, most of the teachings we received were the importance of obeying the prophet and obeying God and those type of things, because the wives that then would come to us would just obey us. So I know it sounds sounds crazy, but that's just
how it was.
Kind of the way it was. Yeah.
Yeah. after being a young bride to Rulin and not wanting to get married. I mean, her even standing up to Warren at all, to where he does have to like
Who is this?
look at it, Rebecca.
Oh.
And Warren just barely said that he was going to break her.
Oh,
I mean, for her to even stand up to him the slightest bit is absolutely
take a
incredible.
lot of
So
courage.
brave.
well, some of the women and just family in general that were in the home, in Rulin Jeff's home, would probably have known a little bit more of behind the scenes what was going on. There was a young girl standing on top of her roof by the chimney. Just laugh at that because that was very common. I was always on my roof. Wasn't supposed to be, but as young kids, we for some reason like being on top of the roofs of our houses, maybe to get a better view. But because the people living within the home with Warren and all that, they may have known some of the things he was doing that they didn't agree with. And I'm sure that if a lot more of the community had known the same things, maybe a lot more would have stood up against him.
Yeah.
It's hard to know for sure, but I think most of the members were just oblivious to what he was actually doing.
Yeah. She's saying she covered her mouth even at the thought of leaving. And I remember Joanna saying that too, that like having even those thoughts of leaving was so like mentally thinking, I can't think that.
Right.
I can't think that. Like,
Oh,
I'm going to be destroyed if I think even for a second about leaving, let alone actually doing it.
Yeah, I battled with that all the time. That if it crossed my mind, I'd be like, no, never, not going to happen. I just push it out as fast as I possibly could.
Yeah.
So
In this instance, where Rebecca's talking about the fact that she did have a brother who had already been kicked out, I will say for the women in general, you know, the Lost Boys, what they went through was horrible, being kicked out, being completely homeless.
no one to go to.
No one to go to. Luckily for people like Shem and Dan Fisher helping those boys, but they really did help a lot of people in the community in the future, because a lot of these girls would have had nothing to be able to go to if there weren't already family members that had already been kicked out. So while it's awful that those people got kicked out, it's really the only way that a lot of these people later were able to leave. I know your sisters weren't able to leave. He has two sisters that have left, and both of them were really only able to leave because they already had family outside.
Right. It seems to be very common that if a girl leaves the community, either they already have family out, or they leave with a boy that they like and they want to be with. And in most cases that I saw anyway, whenever a girl and a boy left together, that relationship did not last very long before they ended up splitting ways. But there are some cases where it did last. But anyway, my point is, normally the women would have to leave with someone or have somewhere to go, because they were kept from really anything from the outside world, an education, any type of job in most cases. So it would be very difficult for them.
Yeah, and as she's saying how difficult and hard it was even leaving to go be with a brother, still having to learn how to do everything. When she's talking about like not even knowing how to like put on makeup or any of those normal things. Right. I've seen, you know, some of the Escaping Polygamy episodes where like Amanda Ray and some of the other girls are like helping these women learn how to dress normally and learning how to put on makeup and learning how to get their hair done or have a haircut. There's so many things that to just be thrown into the real world is really hard.
Oh, yes.
I mean, when Elisa also, I wanted to ask you, Elisa was talking about how hard it was watching her sister go. Did you have siblings that left before you that like you remember how it felt to have a family member leave and know that you weren't going to see them anymore?
Oh, you mean when I was still living
like you were living
in the
in there.
and
You were in the
left.
community and they left?
Yes, and unfortunately, the feelings I had towards them at that time were, well, they're just wicked people now, and I shouldn't be associating with them because now they're in control of Satan, and they're doing his work now because they chose to no longer live here. And So unfortunately, because of the way we were taught to look negatively towards people that choose to leave or people that are kicked out, I didn't really have much of a desire to see them or be with them. It's crazy how that switch is just instant.
You just write them off as
Just
evil, and
yeah, it's so sad to think about now. But I know the same thing happened to me when I moved out, unfortunately. But we knew it was coming, and I guess I knew what I was getting into. And
yeah. Oh, this part makes me so sad for Elisa sharing her experience of her husband finally saying, this is my right to be able to basically rape her because that's what he felt like he was entitled to. And I can't even, she even mentions right now that she didn't even really know what was happening to her. And that's something that the youth aren't taught anything about sex.
oh no.
And so for a woman, I mean, they've lived their entire lives being completely covered, told to never look at a boy, to never kiss a boy, to never fall for a boy. And then at 14 years old, having things happen in a bedroom to them, especially in this case, again, with somebody who she hated, is so sad. And the fact that she continued, she's saying now that she went to Warren to try to ask for help. And I know some people have said before, why didn't some of these women go to law enforcement to begin with? And like Sam said earlier, these women didn't know that rape is illegal, what that is, what that actually means, and that they could get some kind of help for it. The only help that they knew was the prophet. And so when they go, and that was the same thing that happened in Preaching Evil, right? Not Preaching Evil, Mom. Writing to the prophet saying, this is not a good situation, I need to get out of it. And, anytime that there's women that are needing help, they instantly think of going to the prophet. And when the prophet is the one who's put them there in the first place, then they have no hope.
No, and it sounds like Warren just forced them to stay together regardless of how bad it got. So.
Yeah.
And he would even tell them, you think that your way is better than God's way? And try to pin it on her that she was even bringing anything up or calling anything a problem.
Or he said, you need to submit to your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oh, and see, okay, so Ruby also had a brother that had been kicked out that she was able to call up. Thank goodness.
Yes.
Again, even though it's so sad for those boys and heartbreaking that they had that happen, they really were able to be there for their sisters.
Yeah, most of my sisters are still involved and very much a part of the church, the FLDS church, and I'm crossing my fingers and my toes and hoping that one day I get a phone call, and that maybe some more of my sisters want to move out.
Yeah.
But all we can do is be here for them and hope for the best, because trying to go out there and force them to believe that Warren is a bad man or whatever, it just doesn't work that way. Not when it comes to religion. You can't go force someone to change their belief.
Yeah.
At least not easily.
Yeah. And out of the 15, I mean, there's 15 with Sam siblings that have left. And out of those 15, only 2 are sisters.
Women. Yep.
So 2 out of the 15 so far. So really most of the women in his family are still out there.
And all of my full-blooded biological sisters are all a part of it still. Yeah.
Yeah. The fact that that Warren sent Joe to go and get her. Guys,
I'm trying to
this documentary.
I'm trying to catch up to the story here. So
yeah, so Ruby had left to go live with her brother, and Warren called up Joe and said, I'll let you marry her if you go get her.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Now he said, well, tell her if she comes back, she can marry you. So he
you.
said, go get her. And he said, okay. And then.
Oh, my goodness.
So he thinks he finally gets to marry the girl that he's liked forever if he brings her back. Yeah. See, in the back of his brain, he knew it was never going to happen.
Yeah. Wow.
But after everything that she'd been through and being married and then finally getting out and stuff and still like having the hope to be able to be with the guy that she loved the whole time.
Yeah.
Oh, I want them to end up together. I want them to be able to be happily ever after eventually. But I'm guessing since she was crying about it earlier that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But
Be interesting to know where they both are now, you know, and kind of what happened. Are they married and together with someone else or what?
yeah, Ruby or Joe, if either of you see this episode,
We need to
reach
know.
out to us and we would.
Everybody needs to know.
Everybody needs to know because we wish you guys the best and we would love to get to share your story, more about you and less about the trauma that you had to go through.
And for me to you, I'm sorry you dealt with all of that.
Yeah, our hearts are out there for you. Yeah, so he does warns Aaron and then he
Brings
got
her
kicked
back,
out.
and then he's
He got
kicked
kicked
out.
out.
Surprise, surprise. And that just goes to show that he was kicking men out and forcing them to leave just to have the women available for whatever he wanted. Just heartbreaking.
Yeah, so sad. Oh, I wish she had left with Joe.
Yeah. Just say, okay.
Well, if you're going to kick
Does
him
it
out.
say how much longer she stays out there once she goes back?
She said she had 6 kids by the time she was 24.
Oh my goodness.
By 24.
And who? Obviously, she was given to this. Does it say who she married?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm trying to catch up here.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, she's kind of mentioning that once you are a mom, how do you let your 14-year-old get married? And yeah, I agree with her. I can't imagine. And our little girl's only 5.
Oh man.
And I'm like,
Yeah, I don't even like to allow my brain to think about that now that I have a daughter of my own, because I just can't imagine. I mean, if I fully put myself back in my shoes at age 16 or 15, I can understand where they're coming from and why they were doing these things and why they were agreeing to these things. But now I just, of course, I think very differently about all of this now. And
yeah.
my heart goes out to all of these women and a lot of these men that were abused as well. Just sickening.
The fact that there's so many reporters who are willing to continue to pursue it. Mm-hmm. You know, at the time, it's so crazy that at the time you thought they were these evil people interrupting religion, which it's crazy because growing up in St. George, I remember like thinking that as well, like just leave them alone. They're just practicing their religion. And obviously the FLDS come from the LDS. And so because we had polygamy in our church history and we'd been persecuted for that, I feel like the LDS people in St. George definitely had a soft spot for the FLDS, like, oh, but they're still just practicing their religion. But none of us knew all the secondary effects of it, right? Like the underage marriages and them being forced to marry cousins and the rape and the things that were happening with Warren Jeffs. Like even being in a community that close to it, we had no idea that was going on. And I remember growing up thinking, they're just living their religion. Everyone should just leave them alone. And yeah, thank goodness there were people who didn't.
Yes, most people had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. And I just saw a picture flash by with all of the prophets, the FLDS prophets on the wall. And that was very common. We had that in my house growing up. I believe most houses actually had all the pictures of the FLDS prophets on their wall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is not the same in an LDS home.
No.
There may be a picture of like the current prophet maybe sometimes, but most of the pictures that were on the wall were of Jesus Christ, not of the prophet.
You know, the interesting thing. Yeah. See, that's something I noticed when I first moved out of the FLDS religion and went into some of the homes of the LDS church. I would see pictures of Christ, and I was like, huh. There's a lot of pictures of Christ in these homes.
Like
and
almost every room.
It was
honestly.
very
Like
different.
a lot of most of the common
different.
rooms, even in our home, I mean, entryway, living room, hallway, bedroom, or sometimes bedroom would have like the temple that you got married
not
in.
like that out there. And interestingly, some of the pictures or some of the homes would have like, 10 by 12 pictures of all the other prophets. And then when it got to Warren, they'd have a slightly bigger picture of him, So he was worshipped. He is and was and is worshipped in that community.
So it just kind of ended on saying that Warren was going to be starting to be on the run, and that one of the worst things that he could do was fleeing to Texas, which is obviously where he ended up with his convictions that have him in prison now. So
a lot of what's to come is what happened in Texas, Warren on the run, what that kind of looked like.
Yeah.
So
stuff like that. So
a lot more to come.
Yeah, a lot more to come. We will be reviewing episode number 3. We'll be releasing that next week, so stay tuned. Again, if you want to hear more of what it was like for Sam growing up in polygamy, please like, subscribe, find us on Instagram at Growing Up in Polygamy, and and we will be releasing every Friday morning Pacific time. And these next couple weeks, we'll just keep going with the Keep Sweet documentary and reacting to those.
And after these are done, we have a lot of great interviews coming up, which we are very much looking forward to. So stay tuned.
And we'll talk to y'all soon.
We'll talk to you soon.